I am Barbara, and this is my family's narrative of disintegration. It all began when my younger brother Tommy turned 5 years old and I was 7. I can still clearly recall that day. Tommy had attended his first official music lesson with Mom. She looked like she was floating on air when they returned. "Kim, please come here," she exclaimed, her voice booming with anticipation. I dashed down the stairs, curious as to the cause of the commotion. "Your brother is a musical genius." Although I wasn't really sure what that meant, I could tell it was significant. "That's fantastic," I attempted to sound excited. "The teacher says he has perfect pitch," Mom went on, her eyes gleaming. "You realize how uncommon it is? I'm confident that he will become a famous person." After that day, Tommy was the center of attention. His career is her priority. Therefore, Mom gave up her part-time employment. She would go into hours of research on children's talent shows and music competitions. Our living room was transformed into a compact recording studio, complete with a tiny karaoke machine, keyboard, and microphone. Please understand that Tommy was good. His voice sounded clean and clear, like a tiny angel as he sang. However, I couldn't help but feel excluded. Tommy's future stardom was too much for Mom to handle. "And your father? Dad?" Well, he was hardly there. He would get up before me to go to work and return home once I was in bed. Too tired to do anything else on the weekends, he would work on his car in the garage or watch TV. I thereby gained self-care skills. I would prepare my own meals, finish my schoolwork on my own initiative, and make an effort to avoid bothering anyone with my issues. But it wasn't all bad. I had my grandmother, my books, and a couple of close friends. Even though Grandma was Mom's mother, they were very different from one another. Grandma was realistic and down to earth, but Mom was all about the spotlight and celebrity. When I was 12, I began working after school at the tiny convenience store she ran in town. She would say, "You're a good worker, Barbara," grinning at me through her glasses. "Also astute with finances. That will benefit you greatly in life." All the ambiguous praise I received at home paled in comparison to those remarks. At least I wasn't just Tommy's sister. Someone recognized me for who I really was. Tommy, by the way, was doing great with Mom's care. He had already won a couple local singing competitions by the time he was 7 years old. Mom would come home, her face beaming with joy, displaying his prizes and awards. "Did you see Tommy on TV last night?" She wouldn't wait for a response before asking. The judges said he was the most talented child they'd seen in years. I would attempt to be happy for my brother by nodding and smiling, but when I saw how differently we were treated, I couldn't help but feel jealous. Tommy had all the newest toys and technology, but I had to wait months to buy whatever I wanted with my allowance. The distance between Tommy and me widened even more once I started high school. Mom had Tommy enrolled in a pricey private school renowned for its music program, while I went to the neighborhood public school. She would drop him there in our old minivan every morning, worrying over his clothing and reminding him to take voice lessons after school. Having boarded the early bus, I would already be halfway to school. One day, Tommy and Mom were seated at the kitchen table, surrounded by pamphlets and posters. When I got home from an especially demanding day of studies and working a shift at Grandma's store. "What's all this?" With my backpack down beside the door, I inquired. Mom raised her head, joy gleaming in her eyes. "You won't believe it, Kim. Tommy has been asked to participate in a national youth choir audition. There is a New York audition. We'll have to reserve a hotel, flights, and new clothes." I had to ask myself, can we afford all that? Mom smiled, but only momentarily. "We'll get by. For Tommy, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. We cannot allow it to go by." Knowing better than to argue, I nodded, but I couldn't help but think. What about my opportunities? as I made my way to my room, not because I was envious of Tommy's skill. In a way, I was proud of him, but I was also sick of being ignored by my own family. I heard my parents fighting in their bedroom that night. I could just make out enough of their muffled voices to realize that it was about money. Dad was adding, "We're already in debt, Linda. We can't keep spending like this." "But this could be Tommy's big break," Mom urged. "Don't you want him to succeed?" "I do, of course," Dad groaned. "However, what about Kim? Nothing has been set up for her college fund." After a little silence, Mom said in a calmer tone, "Kim is intelligent. She will be awarded scholarships. She has also always been self-sufficient. She'll work things out." Their remarks continued to ring in my ears as I lay in bed and stared up at the ceiling. She'll work things out. It always came down to that, isn't that right? They were supposed to put all of their resources into Tommy's future, leaving me on my own. I started working at Grandma's store the next day. While replenishing shelves, Grandma summoned me to the counter. "Barbara," she began in a soft voice, "is everything okay? You appear preoccupied right now." After a brief period of hesitation, the entire tale, Tommy's audition, the financial issues, and my worries about college, came tumbling out. With each phrase, Grandma's concern on her face grew as she listened patiently. She shook her head when I was done. "Hey, I've been considering. Barbara, you work really hard. Would you like to begin working here at the business and getting paid a real wage? Not just spending money for now, but money you could put aside for later." It was the first time in a long time that I felt seen and valued. I thought to myself, maybe, just maybe, I could create my own opportunities. As I gave my grandmother a hug, I didn't have to wait for someone else to make a future investment in me. I could start making an investment in myself with Grandma's aid. I gave my all to my academics and my job at Grandma's business as the years passed. By the time I turned 15, I had saved up a respectable sum. My objective? A school laptop. I made the decision to count my savings one Friday afternoon. I opened my closet and took out the pink ceramic piggy bank that I had received from my grandmother many years ago. But there was a strange feeling when I shook it. There was no longer the sound of coins jingling. I turned it over and unsealed the bottom, my heart pounding. Nothing. Not one coin dropped out. I headed downstairs, my hands trembling. Tommy was lounging on the couch with a brand new console in his hands, playing video games. Trying not to stutter, I said, "Hey, Tommy, you haven't seen my piggy bank, have you? Or the cash within it?" He didn't even look up from his game. "Nope. Sorry." I took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen, where Mom was preparing dinner. "Mom," I began, Did you take the money from my piggy bank?" She turned to me, her face calm. "Oh, that. Yes, I did. Tommy needed a new game console. His old one broke and he was so upset. I knew you had some savings, so I took it." I stood there speechless. Tears were threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. When will you pay me back?" I managed to ask. Mom sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "We'll see. Times are tight right now, with all of Tommy's expenses. You understand, don't you? This is an investment in his future." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. Without another word, I turned and ran out of the house. I kept running until I reached Grandma's store, tears blurring my vision. Grandma took one look at me and flipped the open sign to closed. She led me to the back room and sat me down. "What happened, Barbara?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched Grandma's face change from concern to disbelief to anger. "What am I going to do, Grandma?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't trust them." Grandma was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the front of the store. When she came back, she was carrying a laptop box. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, placing the box in my lap. "But I think you need it now. Just don't take this home. Keep it here at the store. Use it after your shifts or on weekends. I don't want your mother getting her hands on this too." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I would work harder, save more, and find a way out of this house where I felt like a stranger. My 16th birthday rolled around with little fanfare. Mom remembered the date this time, at least. She and Dad wished me a happy birthday over breakfast, Dad sliding a card across the table before rushing off to work. I invited a few close friends. We set up some folding tables in the backyard, strung up some lights, and had a pretty good time. I'd saved up from my job at Grandma's store to buy snacks and drinks. My best friend, Rachel, helped me decorate with some balloons and streamers we got from the dollar store. As we sat around eating chips and laughing about school drama, I caught myself feeling genuinely happy. For a moment, I could forget about the family dynamics and just be a normal teenager celebrating her birthday. But reality has a way of creeping back in. When Tommy's 16th birthday came around 2 years later, it was an extravaganza. They rented out the fanciest restaurant in town, invited what seemed like half the city, and even hired a professional photographer. The cherry on top? A shiny new car parked outside with a big red bow. I stood off to the side during the party, watching Tommy beam as he accepted congratulations and gifts. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to resent him. This wasn't his fault. He was just living the life our parents, especially Mom, had orchestrated for him. A few months later, I was thrilled to learn I'd been accepted to study economics at a college in the next state. Even better, I'd earned a partial scholarship. But as I soon discovered, partial was the operative word. The scholarship wouldn't cover all my expenses. With trepidation, I approached my parents one evening. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I got into State University for economics. I have a scholarship, but I'll need some help with the rest of the tuition and living expenses." Dad looked up from his newspaper, a crease between his brows. "That's great news about the scholarship, Kim, but you know money's tight right now with Tommy's music school fees." Mom jumped in. "Barbara, you're a smart girl. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe get a job. You've always been so independent." Defeated, I retreated to my room. As I sat on my bed staring at the acceptance letter, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Grandma asking how the conversation with my parents went. I called her back, my voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Barbara, don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." True to her word, Grandma set up a college fund for me. Between that, my scholarship, and a part-time job I picked up at a cafe near campus, I managed to make it work. "You're going to do great things, Barbara," Grandma said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words carried me through the tough times in college when I was up late studying or pulling double shifts at the cafe. I'd remember Grandma's faith in me and push through. I called Tommy occasionally, trying to keep our connection alive. He was at a prestigious music college, all expenses paid by our parents, of course. Despite the differences in our situations, it was nice to hear his voice, to know that at least one person in that house might be missing me. After 4 grueling years of balancing studies, work, and tight budgets, I finally graduated with my degree in economics. Armed with my hard-earned qualifications and a determination to succeed, I returned to my hometown. It wasn't long before I landed a job at a prestigious financial firm and found a small but comfortable apartment to rent. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Work was challenging but rewarding, and in my free time, I started to build a life for myself outside of my family's shadow. I made new friends, took up hiking on weekends, and even started dating a bit. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "Barbara, I need your help." Those words sent a chill down my spine. In all my years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking for my help. "What's wrong?" I asked, leading her to the couch. She sat down heavily, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sick, Kim, really sick. The doctors say I need treatment, but our insurance won't cover it all." My heart dropped. Despite everything, she was still my mother. "How much do you need?" 15,000, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's a lot, but I didn't know where else to turn. Your father and we've spent everything on Tommy's education. We thought it would pay off by now, but..." The next morning, we drove to the bank in silence. As we waited in line, Mom started talking, her voice low. "You know, Tommy's doing so well," she said. "He's got offers from several big music groups. Once he signs, we'll be able to pay you back in no time." I nodded, only half listening. My mind was racing, thinking about how I'd manage the loan repayments on top of my rent and other expenses. After signing what felt like a mountain of paperwork, I transferred the $15,000 to my mother's account. As we left the bank, she hugged me tightly. A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was Tommy, my brother, posting selfies from the Swiss Alps. Confused, I quickly sent him a message. "Hey, Tommy, aren't you supposed to be in school?" "What are you doing in Switzerland?" His reply came quickly. "Oh, hey, Kim, yeah. Mom surprised me with this trip. Said I was having a creative block and needed to recharge. It's amazing here. I'm staying for 2 months." I stared at my phone, my mind refusing to process what I was reading. 2 months in Switzerland? Creative block? Then it hit me. The $15,000 loan wasn't for medical treatment. It was for Tommy's vacation. With shaking hands, I called my mother. "Barbara, what is it now?" Her voice was irritated, as if I was interrupting something important. I took a deep breath. "Mom, we need to talk about the loan, about Tommy's trip. How could you lie to me like that?" There was a pause, then she sighed. "Now listen here. Your brother is a creative person. He needs constant inspiration and pampering to open up creatively. This trip was essential for his career. He's going to be famous, and we all need to support him." "Support him?" I echoed, my voice rising. "By taking out loans we can't afford? By lying to your other child?" "Oh, don't be such a miser," she scoffed. "You should be happy to support your brother." That was the last straw. "Mom, I want the money back. All of it now." Her laugh was cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Barbara. The money's spent. Besides, you're doing well enough. You don't need it." "If you don't pay me back," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "I'll sue you." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then she exploded. "Sue me? Your own mother? You're a terrible daughter. I can't believe I raised such a selfish, heartless child." "This is your last chance, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Pay me back, or I'm going to court." "Go ahead," she spat. "See if I care. You're dead to me, Barbara. Dead." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and shock. I'd known this conversation wouldn't go well, but I never imagined it would end like this. In a daze, I called the one person I knew I could always count on, Grandma. I broke down, sobbing as I recounted everything that had happened. Grandma listened patiently, making soothing noises as I poured out my heart. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Grandma spoke, her voice firm. Barbara, listen to me. What your mother did was wrong. If you decide to go through with this, I'll support you. I know a good lawyer, my friend's son. He might be willing to take on your case for a reduced fee. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and sleepless nights. True to her word, Grandma covered the legal fees and introduced me to her friend's son, a sharp young lawyer named Michael. It's an open and shut case, Michael assured me after our first meeting. We have the bank records, the text messages. Your mother doesn't have a leg to stand on. The day of the trial arrived. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time in months. She sat on the other side, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't even look at me. The proceedings seemed to pass in a blur. Michael presented our case clearly and concisely, showing the judge the evidence of my mother's deception. When it was her turn to speak, my mother spun a tale of a desperate need for a family medical emergency, but her story quickly fell apart under questioning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made his ruling. In the matter of Barbara Johnson versus Linda Johnson, he began, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of $15,000 plus interest and court costs. A few days later, I received notice that my mother had taken out a loan to repay me. The money was back in my account, but it felt hollow. I'd won the case, but I'd lost my family in the process. The dust had barely settled from the court case when the real storm hit. It started with a notification on my phone. A friend had tagged me in a post. Curious, I opened it, only to feel my stomach drop. There, on my mother's social media page, was a long, heart-wrenching post about how her own daughter had cruelly taken her to court. She painted herself as a loving, sacrificial mother who had given everything for her children, only to be betrayed in her time of need. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days as more relatives reached out, not to hear my side, but to berate me for my actions. I raised you better than this, my aunt scolded. You brought shame to this entire family, a cousin messaged. Don't bother coming to the next family reunion, an uncle warned. In the midst of this storm, there was one unwavering source of support. Grandma. She called me every day, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. Don't you pay any mind to those fools, she'd say firmly. They don't know the half of what's been going on in that house all these years. A week after my mother's posts went viral, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, my father's. I've been seeing your mother's posts, he began, and I braced myself for the criticism. But then he surprised me. I want to hear your side of the story, the full story. So I told him everything, the years of feeling overlooked, the incident with my piggy bank, the struggles through college, and finally the loan and the betrayal that led to the lawsuit. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, to my shock, my father's voice came back thick with emotion. I had no idea, he said quietly. Barbara, I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father. I followed your mother's lead for too long. I told myself I was providing for the family by working long hours, but the truth is, I was running away from the problems at home. I should have been there for you. Tears were streaming down my face now. This was the most open, honest conversation I'd had with my father ever. I've got a lot to make up for, he said. I know that, but if you're willing, I'd like to try to be the father I should have been all along. As we continued to talk, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a parent in my corner. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. After our heart-to-heart, Dad decided to take a closer look at the family finances, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He found that Mom had been secretly withdrawing money from their joint account for years, funneling it all into Tommy's career. But that wasn't the worst of it. She had obtained several loans under both of their identities in order to finance Tommy's endeavors. Dad had been totally in the dark about their mounting debt. The ensuing altercation was highly charged. Although I wasn't present, the neighbors told me about it. They said that there was yelling, that dishes were breaking, and that eventually police cars arrived. After that, Dad submitted a divorce petition. After acrimonious proceedings, Mom received half of everything, which she immediately used to settle her mountain of debt. I kept my distance from Mom, concentrating on mending my bond with Dad and appreciating Grandma's continuous support. Things felt normal again. Then, approximately a year into the divorce, Mom's victorious posts began to resurface on social media. Tommy had secured a position in a well-known band after graduating from his music college. She always joked about Dad and me in her captions, using phrases like, "I told you so." "A mother always knows," she wrote, adding that some people couldn't see the potential. Who's chuckling right now? I made an effort to ignore it. I was feeling like I was finally on firm ground, doing well at my job, and having recently put down a deposit on my own apartment. In addition, Dad was doing better than I had ever seen him, appearing happier and more at ease. However, life has a habit of surprising you with unexpected turns of events. Tommy returned to Switzerland 2 years after his great break. His social media was flooded with glitzy alpine photos and videos of him having a good time with his bandmates. Then, hoping to wow his followers with his vocal range in the thin, cold air, he made the decision to record himself singing at the top of a mountain one frosty morning. It was a catastrophe. He had a bad cold, which turned into a dangerous throat infection. Even with the best medical attention, Tommy's singing voice was lost. Mom was devastated by the news. Later on, her neighbors informed me that they had heard yelling and the noises of objects being hurled and shattered coming from her house. She was completely hysterical when they went to check on her. She continued rambling about lost money and dashed hopes, not realizing who was around. They were forced to make a help request. Mom was placed in a mental health hospital. Her catastrophic nervous breakdown, which was made worse by years of stress, was the diagnosis made by the doctors. Tommy, on the other hand, became depressed and started drinking. We had been unsure about his prognosis for months, but he began to improve things gradually, with my help and Dad's. After becoming clean, he unexpectedly applied to colleges to teach music, shocking everyone with his decision. Over coffee one day, he confided in me, "I can't sing anymore, but maybe I can help other kids who love music do it right. You know, free from all the stress and unreasonable demands." I was filled with pride for my little brother. "I think that's a great idea, Tommy." That evening, as I drove home, I thought back on the turbulent past few years. I contemplated my mother, who remained at the institution, imprisoned in a world she had created. About Dad, who's at last allowed to lead his own life. Tommy's journey towards a new direction. Regarding myself, I had persevered, defended my principles, and emerged victorious from the ordeal.